Yeah.
Okay, so we're live now. Let's see. Give it a few moments for people to join. All right, there we go. Hi, everyone. Thank you for your time. I think we're going to give it a few minutes before we start today's conversation. But Varun, you're welcome to take it away just to start.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. It's great to see you here. I have not really seen people come in, but a great way to do that and for us to know where you're calling in from is to just put in the chat which location are you coming in today from?
Let us know. Are you here in the United States? Are you outside of the United States? A lot of those questions are, or at least those answers are very helpful for us because in terms of today's conversation, we want to make sure that you get the answers that you need to get kind of the, let's say, demystification that's going to be happening today be as valuable for you. So it's helpful to know where you guys are located. Thank you. So we have a couple people here from the United States. A lot of domestics.
Now I can see the comments.
Yeah. I see a lot of domestics. Hi, everyone.
Oh, I see a couple familiar faces already. Hi, Vishali. Hi, Yogesh. Nice to see you guys in here. Whom is from Denver. Awesome.
All right, everyone. I think we're probably going to get started in about a couple minutes. I would say like 12:03. Very aware of the standard times that go across different regions. We have a saying in my home country of Indonesia. We call it Indonesian Standard Time as well. Essentially, like, oh, we're on the way means that you're about to leave the house, potentially, in the next few minutes.
We have a similar thing with the Indian Standard Time as well.
Okay, so we'll give it like one more minute. I think one thing that I have to express to everyone here is that there will be time for questions and answers towards the end of today's conversation. However, feel free to start putting in your questions in the chat so we can accumulate it. Sometimes there's going to be a scenario where we'll answer your question as we're having the discussion, if it makes sense. What I will say to everyone here is that remember that the chat is public. So in the chat being public, any confidential information shouldn't be shared. It also means that whenever I answer a question or whenever Varun answers a question, it doesn't establish any type of client or attorney-client relationship. And any specific legal advice can't be rendered. It'll be general because sometimes it depends on like how much about your case circumstances can apply. But at the end of the day, we'll do our best to help you guys out and give you the depth that you need.
Awesome.
Okay.
On that note, Nicole, it would be great for everybody to just hear from you, hear your background, and tell us more about yourself.
Right. So hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's live stream and webinar. My name is Nicole Ganara. I am the principal immigration attorney here at Manifest Law. Manifest Law is a tech-centric, tech-forward law firm. Our goal is to basically redefine what it means to do legal practice and how people engage with legal practices. What we have seen in the market is that there's a lot of antiquated processes. There's a lot of lack of visibility when it comes to what clients experience when they go through any sense of legal production or legal process. So in trying to change that, Manifest was formed because we do believe that there's a lot of room and demand to create better client experiences. When it comes to immigration, we do advise a lot of emerging companies all the way to large multinational organizations when it comes to corporate immigration. However, we also do a substantial amount of individual client work. whether it's an extraordinary ability visas or alternatively even general work visas for every person. So we do everything in the 9 yards related to immigration. And I would say that it's something that we readily focus on, is making sure that you can build your future and establish yourself here in the United States.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that's it about Manifest so far.
Cool. I definitely have some questions for you specifically, but
Cool.
I'll introduce people to myself. You might already know me as you might have come here through the link. So I'll keep it short. Hey guys, I'm Varun from Beyond Grad. I, like many in here, went the F1, CPT, OPT, STEM OPT, H1B, and now EB2 route that a lot of you might be familiar with. I am an EB2. I have an EB2 I-140 priority date, and I'm excited for the session because we want to try to figure out how are you able to fast track your green card. So I'll keep it at that, and I'll start asking Nicole some questions about that specifically. Please add your questions if they are related to what we are talking about. I might take them in. If not, we'll wait in the end to kind of ask her some questions. So, Nicole, thanks for this discussion. It's exciting to have an immigration lawyer talk more about demystifying the EB-1 process to kind of put the immigration in the whole discussion. I would love to kind of hear from you about your experience. I saw on your LinkedIn profile some connections to Jakarta, some schooling, some work experience. What was your pathway to the US?
So I will tell you that I was especially lucky. My mother was a green card holder. And when I was really young, my father had the foresight to say, hey, at the time, Indonesia was a little bit unstable. We were in the middle of a dictatorship. So it's like, just in case anything happens, why don't you give birth in the United States because you're a green card holder? So I was born as a US citizen, but it doesn't mean that I haven't had a lot of exposure to how immigration can impact people's lives. My own uncle went through an asylum process because in 1998, at the fall of the government, there was significant racial discrimination and pushback against Chinese Indonesians. So I'm Indonesian, but of Chinese descent. So there has been a lot of family stories, but I will also say that a lot of people that I know are immigrants. But I spent a lot of time in Jakarta. I was born in the US I was here for 2 months. And then I went back to Indonesia and I lived there all the way until I was 16. And then when I was 16, came back to the United States and kind of continued my journey from there on. Decided that America was the one for me and wanted to be very deeply ingrained in immigration because I worked during the height of the DACA period. And I really saw how impactful the work that we do can be to not only the individual applicant, but the families around them as well. So that's kind of why I'm in this passion, let's call it.
Very cool. And I relate to the birth path, to the childhood part, because I have two daughters. One of them was born in the US. The other one is born in Canada. We'll see what happens when they grow up and kind of want to pursue. So I can understand that part. That's great foresight from your father. I think that's excellent. Before we start getting into the immigration questions, like I want to take a small detour, which is I saw some culinary path in the history of you becoming a lawyer. What was that about? I would be curious to know.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people who know me know that I love to challenge myself or I like to do like new things, right? Because I feel like there's so much that we can learn in so many different aspects whenever you try these new experiences. And I had gone to an early college and I felt a little bit burnt out because I graduated with my bachelor's degree when I was 19. So it was hard for people to take me seriously. So I said, What is something that I can do that doesn't require me to have like a specific academic skill set, but one that I can physically show makes me really good at what I do. So I chose a vocational path. I decided to go to culinary school. So I went to culinary school, worked in the culinary field for a while, but I actually learned a lot. Actually, I've written a lot of wonderful O1 presentations for chefs because I have a really good knowledge of that chef experience and hospitality background. And I know how to really sell kind of like what makes a good, an extraordinary chef. Depending on the perspective. But I learned a lot of discipline. I also learned a lot of creativity, but I also learned what it means to be part of like a machine or an engine, right? So when a lot of clients come to me and they say, I feel like the government will never understand that what I do because I feel like I'm a cog in the wheel. At the end of the day, if you're a cog in a wheel, that means you're part of a significant engine that's producing something. So in the culinary world, I learned that even if I'm just a line cook, even if I'm just a prep cook, there is a significance to the work that I do that creates that beautiful end product, whether it's a Michelin star presentation or even something as simplistic as a bento box or a lunch box that's going out for a lunch meal. It's all a matter of perspective, and it's all a matter of highlighting the best of what that even means to somebody.
Very cool. It's amazing how we can look back and connect the dots and see
Yeah.
where our strengths come from. So very cool. To set the stage for our EB-1 discussion, love to hear about country quotas for green card. I think a lot of us are here because of that. Can you talk more about country quotas for green cards and how that inadvertently impacts certain people from certain countries? I would love to understand that part of, or for you to share that part with everybody here.
For sure. Basically, the legal framework that established like the visa bulletin and how this whole entire ecosystem of immigrant visas was designed essentially relies upon a total limit of immigrant visas in the employment-based categories that can be issued per year. Essentially, there is a limit. I believe it's like 140,000 green cards that can be issued to primary applicants. They don't really include derivatives in that context. And even then, the limits per country were established to kind of create a scenario of diversity. What they didn't want to happen was that one large segment of a populace would all kind of consume that total amount of visas per year. So they said, hey, every country can have approximately 9,800 visas divided amongst the visa categories that are established here for the employment-based side. The thing is that how it can impact applicants born in countries like China and India is that these are the highly voluminous countries. You're talking about 9,800 slots for a country that has over 1 billion individuals, right? And of those 1 billion individuals, even if 100,000 people wanted to move to the United States, which is a very small segment of that entire number, that is enough to already establish a backlog of some format, right? I will say that when it comes to that policy changing anytime soon, it would require congressional action, right? So it's not as simple as an executive order or the government deciding to do some level of rulemaking. It is something that was built into the INA. It was designed through Congress and can really only be changed by Congress. There are ways to make arguments about what that limitation should be interpreted as. Is it per country? Is it per country per type? But at the end of the day, there's not really much that can be changed immediately, at least. But over time, I can see the government shifting, whether it's priorities towards merit-based adjudications or trying to rearrange like how many visas are assigned per employment-based category. Maybe it's a lot more for EB-1s compared to before, or maybe they do a whole audit process and they try to recapture numbers that were never used in previous years.
Interesting. So the struggle that a lot of people from these specific countries face, the more voluminous countries, is not going to go away anytime soon. If it does, then it will be interesting, but it requires a lot of different steps to get there. Now,
And I will also
I,
say very quickly to everyone here, though, is that I think it's also an education problem. I think that a lot of people in the general public don't know anything about visa bulletins. So the people who vote or the people who are kind of the best advocates to representatives in like constituencies, they just may not be aware of the struggles that the visa bulletin creates. Like I cannot tell you the number of times, Varun, that I've been on the Thanksgiving dinner table, right? I'm wonderfully married. I have a husband whose whole entire family is like very American, right? Born and raised in the United States. And they have no idea the trials and tribulations that immigrants go through when they come to the United States. So I always tell every immigrant or anybody who's a foreign national here, try to advocate and share that knowledge with people, right? Whether it's your colleagues, your friends, people in your company, the more that people know about it and the more you advocate for yourself, the more that the representatives will understand how it can impact on an economic level, right? How these visa bulletins function, right? At the end of the day, if we have more talented people in the United States who can contribute to the economy, the better it is, especially when we're moving towards a very innovation-led economy.
This reminds me of a wonderful experience I had when I was working at a Fortune 500 company, where my my manager came in and he was asking me about, okay, how soon can you get a green card? And we were like three of us. Like there was a Brazilian who would get a green card in like a few years, somebody from UK who would get it in a few years, and here I was explaining how it would take me probably 100 years to, no hyperbole, 100 years to get my green card. It was a very unique conversation, and you're absolutely right that education doesn't exist in the section of the public that vote for these things. So you are absolutely right in that. It brings me back to us as individuals. And when we first get started in sending out our green card application, I remember my lawyer asking me, how many research papers have you written? How many citations do you have? And I remember creating a packet for them, which is, okay, here are my research papers, here are my citations. And I feel that this question is such a default question that every one of us have been asked, where we've all defaulted that we need to be researchers and have a ton of publications and citations to even qualify for something like an EB-1 process. Can you demystify this myth about, oh, only researchers can have EB-1 green cards?
Yeah, I'm going to demystify it really quickly. You don't need to have those things, right? There are a lot of wonderful people who have achieved the EB-1A without really having, whether it's strong publications or any publications at all. I think there's this, genuine fear, right, in approaching the EB-1A, because the way that the EB-1A looks, right, superficially, is that it focuses a lot on research, let's call it achievements, right? When it was first designed, like, I don't think there were a lot of practical fields that exist today. When the government put together this concept of the EB-1A, the traditional scientist or the traditional researcher was like the main version of what STEM would have looked like, right? Like I'm in a lab doing research and publications. However, the government has acknowledged that there is a shift in that. If you are an engineer, traditional notion of an engineer, even in the most innovative fields like quantum computing or even like designing things related to additive manufacturing, the reality is that you're in a practical field that doesn't really have publications, right? You're designing new things, you're developing new things within a corporate environment, because that's what really deals a lot with these engineering roles. So the government does understand that. So when it comes to publications, I actually want to remind everybody here that a practitioner should be able to tell you, well, research journals are not the only thing, right? This notion of a scholarly article is actually quite expansive. The government, if you look at the guidances for the EB-1As, particularly for scholarly article, actually divides it into two sections: academic and non-academic. So if you have an academic publication, that's normal. The scholarly article published in a journal and you have citations. But emphasis on non-academic, they recognize that there are industry publications. You're talking like technical white papers or even just industry insights that are well researched, not necessarily original research, right? But really you are providing like some sort of I would say condensation, but like some sort of condensed summary of something that you have seen or you have approached in your experiences, and publishing it in industry trade publications can really work. If I can give like a quick example, imagine you're an economist, right? Or a financial analyst. You wrote an op-ed and you're saying that the United States should invest in Vietnam for manufacturing purposes compared to the China. And here's why. You're going to write a beautiful paper that goes according to a 2022 World Report, XYZ, here's some data, but it's not original data, but it's well researched and cited to the right places. If that article gets published in The Economist, Lenny's newsletter, or anything that you can argue is what an industry expert would be reading within your field, and it goes through an editorial vetting process, there is an argument for a scholarly article right there, because it's a non-academic scholarly article. So there is a level of recognition when the officers are adjudicating these applications that these articles do exist in these practical spaces, because research journals are just not commonplace. And I also want to remind people that in the EB-1A, they have a category known as comparable evidence. If you can make the argument, right, that this is something that is considered an achievement within your field, because there is, again, acknowledgement by the government that these criteria are not as expansive as they should be, because there's a lot of occupations that are out there, then you can try to make the argument using that particular flexible category. But yeah, that's how I deal with scholarly articles. I think people should not be afraid of the EB-1A. There's a lot of different categories out there. And there's also really unique ways to meet that category without the citations and without the research journals.
And that's something I had no clue about. And I didn't even ask my lawyer at the time. And now I do. But then what happens when you start to know about the EB-1A, which is the extraordinary ability pathway, is that the immediate reaction is, oh my, it's called the Einstein visa. So I need to be equivalent to what Einstein was to theoretical physics, or I need to, like AP said in the chat, need to have like an Olympic medal. Is that like, how true is that? Is that the end of is that the extreme of that pendulum?
I think that's the complete extreme, right? I think we have to take a look at how USCIS or the government really designed the EB-1A, is that proving that you're in the top of your field. Einstein, yes, is at the very top of his field, but he's like in the 0.001%, even compared to some of the most established scientists in the world. But that doesn't mean that the other established scientists are not distinguished scholars in their own right. Like, I know that, Oppenheimer is a name now because of the mainstream movie, but if you had asked like 10 to 15 years ago who that person was, they probably wouldn't really know, right? And I think that there's a question of being asked, like, would that person qualify if we always said that it needed to be a level of Einstein in order to come to the United States? What I'd like to tell a lot of people is that you have to treat the EB-1A in the way that it was designed. There's a criteria, right? There is a set of criteria. You meet 3 criteria, then you have to prove final merits, where you say, against other people in my field, I am distinguished. I am at the top of the field. You don't have to be Einstein. You don't need to have an Olympic medal. You just need to show that level of distinguishment above others. And that is something that you can cultivate. If you do the right research and you invest your time in the right places, you can cultivate an argument to say that you are different, that you are above the others.
Very cool. I think more and more we need to understand that it is industry related, it is specific niche related, and you can position yourself as one of the top performers if you have experience. You've been able to showcase that you are at the top of your field, and a lot of people can help you do that as well. Now, I had one question about the different EB-1 categories, because we've already talked about 2, and I know there's a third one. Can you share the 3 different EB-1 categories, and how can you, or what does each of them mean?
Right. So we have the EB-1A that we've already talked about, which is the extraordinary ability visa that rewards individuals who are at the very top of their field, who have sustained national or international acclaim. You have number 2, which is the EB-1B, which is for outstanding researchers and professors. Essentially, institutions and private institutions can sponsor someone who is proven to be able to be an outstanding researcher or professor. In terms of EB-1C, that is a green card for multinational executive transfers or multinational senior managers. If for many of you who are here, if you are on an L1A, you will recognize that some of the requirements are substantially similar. Essentially, you are being transferred or have been transferred from a foreign entity abroad that is being brought to the United States to a related US entity. So think about it as if you were working for Citibank in India in some sort of senior leadership role, and now you're being transferred to Citibank in New York in a senior leadership role. And that is a pathway to a green card as well.
A follow up on that is, let's say I've never worked in my home country or anywhere outside the US, which is true for a lot of people, or I've been working in the US for a really long time now. How can I qualify for that pathway? Are there creative legal ways to do that?
Of course. So for the EB-1C, I wouldn't say that it's creative, but it's kind of more so determining for yourself if it's a well worth investment to leave the country for at least a year. So fundamentally for an EB-1C, you have to show that you've worked 1 year in the past 3 years at the foreign related entity before being transferred to the US entity for that permanent role. For a lot of people, when they think about the difference between the wait times for even EB2 into EB1, investing living 1 year abroad and being a senior manager abroad is well worth that investment, right? I'm going to go back to my home country, in this case, Indonesia. I'm going to work for a large institution. Let's say it's, I'm trying to think, McKinsey, right? I'm going to be a director at McKinsey for a year over there, given my US based experience or my international experience. And then I will request the company to transfer me back to the United States and sponsor me for a green card. For a lot of you who may be at that kind of bargaining table, or they need a lot of the US talent to go abroad for a variety of projects and reasons, there is a way for you to negotiate that EB-1C will happen for you when you come back, right? This is not a permanent assignment. This is a temporary assignment to grow the team or address a specific project. Bring me back to the United States and sponsor me for the EB-1C.
I think that is a splendid idea, and it might actually also be career defining. I remember the same Fortune 500 company that I was working at went and had a lunch with the CTO, and he said the people who get promoted faster have more wider experience throughout the organization. That means different domains, that means different locations. So not only can it be conducive for your green card, it in a way can also help you progress in that company faster. So EB1C pathway is a really interesting one. Whoever wants to, talk more about that, consider that, get some idea of whether you qualify for that or not. I'll ask the Manifest team to again share that link with everybody, which is an awesome value add from the Manifest team, which is you get a free consultation with them. So I think that is a great idea for anyone who's considering EB1C. I'll come back to EB1A, which is probably the more popular path where people try to get ready for it. Like I said, I had no clue about it. As soon as my immigration lawyer said, Varun, you don't have enough research papers, don't qualify for EB1, I thought all paths for me were closed completely. Can you break that myth also for everybody, Nicole, about if a lawyer says no, is that the end of the road for you?
I will say, like, sometimes the reasons why lawyers say no is because it's when they're thinking in their minds is that immediately what is in front of me does not qualify for an EB-1A. But that doesn't mean that you will never qualify for an EB-1A. A lot of people go through journeys, right? A lot of people need to expend the time and the investment in many ways into building into the right criteria. For many people that I meet, they usually already have like 1 or 2 categories. And remember, the magical number is 3 categories. And there's so many other categories. So let's say, Varun, you had come to me and you're like, okay, I don't have any research papers. And I say, okay, you may have lead critical role already because you clearly have an established career so far. Maybe you already have high remuneration because you've been working at one of the higher private market companies that does pay on that higher end of the pay scale. But you're like, but Nicole, what's the third? Well, removing like scholarly articles and all the suggestions that I said earlier about non-academic publishing, what if you decided to start doing peer review? You don't have to be a scholar to be in peer review. right? You just need to get into the right databases. Join IEEE, become a senior member, get into the reviewing databases, and start doing conference proceeding reviews. Alternatively, there's a lot of institutions like Springer and Elsevier who are looking for people who are in the STEM fields to review other people's publications or technical publications before they get published and give feedback. For many of you who are entrepreneurs, maybe it's pitch competitions, hackathons, and the like. Those are a lot of opportunities that can build into a wonderful third category known as judging, where you are judging individuals and professionals in your field or even in an allied field. Judging is actually quite expansive because they say, or allied field. So let's say you're selling yourself as like the #1 expert in like search query, I don't know, discovery engine. I don't know. That's a lot of terms nowadays for search queries, right? And the government's not going to say you need to be only judging competitions relating to search engines and search queries. Like they're going to say, okay, what's an allied field? That could be anything from cybersecurity, could be anything to general software engineering or even product design, right? Because these are fields that are allied against you. For you to be a functional, let's say, software engineer and you're building a product, you need the product designer to put the face to it, right? So all of this is to say that judging is actually quite an expansive and very powerful category for people to build into. So going back to your story, Varun, if you have those first two, and then I give you insights and I give you suggestions on how to build that third category, there's nothing to say that whether it's like 6 months later or a year later that you're going to say, hey, Nicole, look at all this stuff that I did. And then now you do qualify. You do have a meritorious argument for an EB-1A.
Totally agree. I think great showcase of how there are different categories. If I'm not mistaken, there are 10 of them, and you have to qualify for three. There are multiple ways, multiple categories you could qualify, probably right away or a year or two down the line once you kind of get into these peer reviews or judging or these different avenues like that. From my experience, I was given a partnership stake at the company that I was in. I could have used that for high remuneration, even if I was not selling my stake, excuse me, in the company at that point. That could have added to my salary to become, to be able to clear that path. I'm not trying to sidestep the conversation. I'm trying to share that there are multiple ways to figure this out and to kind of create a packet that makes you one of the top candidates in your niche and have you successfully fulfill these different criterias. So,
And if I could give a suggestion, right?
yeah,
Because at the end of the day, when it comes to putting together an EB-1A or even an EB-2 and IW, right? Something that argues something about who you are in the field, what can be helpful to an attorney is a description or an explanation about what it is that you even do. Like, what is your field about? Attorneys are not subject matter experts, right? Like when I sit here and I have a cloud architect in front of me, I do try my best to learn as much as I can. I never knew that there were so many different things, like everything from Java, people in cloud engineering, to AWS systems, to Azure. And I'm like, okay, how do all these things interconnect, and why is it so important to have a director who knows all three, right? Those tools and those explanations are extremely powerful for us because we'll make the argument, how rare is it that you have someone who's fluent in all three? How rare is it to find somebody who's able to connect the dots between all three or create implementation or transition programs if someone's swapping from one type of architecture to another, right? Those things are what can elevate your application very quickly because we're able to say that's your niche, that's your specificity.
that's a wonderful insight because the ownership not just lies with the lawyer, the ownership also lies with you and what you share, how much you know about the process, and how are you able to kind of communicate to the lawyer as to how you could qualify for for a few different things. So I like that part, which is
100%.
where the ownership is from both sides.
It should be a collaborative process, right? This is a representation of your life when it goes into USCIS, right? And I don't live your everyday life. I can try to learn as much as I can about your 9 to 5, but truly, you are going to be the only person that knows what makes your work significant. If I am sitting every single day in this desk or I am in this occupation, why does my work matter? What are the problem statements that I am resolving? How am I resolving it and contributing to a significant tangible outcome? There is a reason why these companies are paying you, whether it's 200K, 300K, whatever it is, right? You explain to me, why are they paying you that money, right? It's not just job duties and responsibilities. They're paying you for a tangible outcome.
It's like a green card Shark Tank, where the lawyers are the people who invest, and you have to pitch yourself and make
Yeah.
sure you are saying the right things. Pretty cool. One thing that reminds me about this is the ownership part. Is that I see a lot of friction. I had a lot of friction within me. I had friction that I could see amongst my peers, my friends, about either doing the work or seeing whether you qualify for the EB-1A. I know you've had multiple discussions amongst your team with candidates on the other side. Why do you feel there is friction in taking action or learning more about this process?
I think it's because, and I think I can speak very generally, having lived in Asia, like, I think us Asians are very modest. Like, we have this whole thing of, like, whether it's imposter syndrome or feeling like we have to continuously compare ourselves to who we believe has achieved more. The number of times that I've been at conferences and I've talked to wonderfully achieved people, they're like, oh, Nicole, I work at Google DeepMind. I do like all this crazy patent work, but I'm not working at OpenAI. I'm not the OpenAI person who's making like $2 million a year. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, but you work for Google in one of their most innovative programs. You have all these patents and achievements. And they're like, oh, but I never thought I was extraordinary because I wasn't at OpenAI, right? And I'm not making that kind of money. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying, I think it's a cultural aspect, right? I think a lot of the time, immigrants, when we have seen whether it's our parents striving so hard or us striving so hard, that strive comes from this perception of, I can always do better, when the reality is that you've already achieved so much just to be in that position to keep challenging yourself, right? So that's the first thing. I think it's just like a general cultural thing from foreigners, like, if I could speak for that part. And then the second thing that I have to say is that I think the extraordinary ability visa has a branding issue, right? I think when you told me, like, it's the Einstein visa and it's expensive, there's a lot of rhetoric out there that goes like, it's supposed to be hard, and it is. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. People are getting them approved. Like, I think if you ever like went to a public forum and you're asking, like, have you been approved for EB-1, you're going to get random people who maybe you felt like your career was much more developed than theirs. It's like, yeah, I have an EB-1A. And that's because they spent the time, whether it's building into the categories or at least trying it. Because what's like the downside, right? I understand that finances and resources and time are involved, but you won't know if you get this first preference category, this accelerated pathway to a green card, unless you do try. So there's like a lot of that in the market for sure.
I do have to paraphrase because I think this is critical. The two reasons you said is one, there is imposter syndrome in our the culture that we come from, where we feel like we are not enough or we haven't done enough. And then the other is the branding issue. Oh, it's just unachievable. I can't really get there. It reminds me of one of the parties that I went to, which was predominantly people from India, Indian immigrants in the US. And you know how green card is like a common topic during those parties. And it's all about visa bulletin and what's the priority date right now. And a friend of mine came to me privately and said, Varun, I just wanted to tell you, because you write about EB-1 and all this immigration stuff on LinkedIn, I actually qualified for EB-1 and I'll get a green card soon. I was ecstatic for him. The curious thing that happened next was that when he shared it with the group, everybody started to ask him questions about how he qualified, what did he do, what kind of lawyers was he working with. Immediately, it became accessible to them. So now they knew somebody who was like them, had gone to the same school, was able to get an EB-1A. And I think at this point, everybody has that one example where they're like, okay, if that person can qualify, maybe I can. But there's always that doubt. how can somebody who is in that part right now kind of evaluate whether they are ready for the EP1A, or what do they need to be ready for that EP1A? What advice would you give them?
When it comes to benchmarking yourself or kind of sitting there to decide whether or not you should move forward, actually your gut tells you a lot. And let me explain what, because I think a lot of people are going to like, oh, Nicole, why can't you just give me how many number of peer reviews have I done and how many, things like that. It's not that easy because it does depend on your field. It does depend on the kinds of things that you've done, but be honest with yourself, right? If you started with not much, right, and you know that you have to build into a third or a fourth or whatever categories that you want to build into, trust me that you will know, wait, does this mean now I'm different from all of my colleagues? That's usually the first question I ask. When you sit and you look at your resume now, after investing your time in building up your credibility and building up into these criterias, do you feel distinguishable from the person who's sitting next to you in the office? That's a good test, right? Do you feel that now you're much more marketable? Because all of these things, when you're building into criteria, it's actually not just for the EB-1A. Right? I always tell people that the more that you do these things, they usually do help with your own career. If you do end up publishing articles, when you apply for your new job, when they Google you, they're going to see that you've been publishing in these credible industry publications or magazines like payments.com if you work at fintech, right? Or Hacker Noon if you work in a variety of different DevOps kind of stuff, right? The reality is that those elements you will know for yourself, like, wow, I actually feel very different than I used to. So that feeling is so real. And I've done that with a lot of clients who, when they first came to me, didn't really have much. And then 6 months later, they're like, wait, I think my life is just different now. People are treating me differently. At minimum, though, I wouldn't pull the trigger unless you have like a solid 3 categories. And what I mean by that is like, hey, I can confidently say I've met lead critical role. I can confidently say that I'm being paid at the top of the private market. And I can also confidently say I've met this 3rd category because I've done a lot of peer review, which is generally accepted for judging. That's kind of where I would say a conversation or a stronger engagement with a lawyer can be the most helpful. But also telling people ahead of time, it does help to talk to an attorney early to make sure that you don't invest your time in the wrong places. Because I've had a number of people try to build on their own. And then when they come back to me, I have to tell them that all of these publications are not good publications. And they've spent money and 6 months into doing it.
I think that is an excellent point, because we are at a point, we have shared that link with everybody where people can just come in for a consultation. Let's say I come into a consultation and I share my profile with you, what I think, where I qualify, where I don't qualify, or just I'll share my resume and say what can be done with this. There are 2 paths here. There's either somebody who's ready to apply right away, or in the near term, somebody who has to build a profile. Like, how does Manifest approach that conversation?
So, I mean, the easier answer for the near term is that, yeah, let's hit the ground running. Let's start being efficient with this. Let's set up some milestones, and we're going to start getting this application out to the best of its ability, right? A lot of it starts with document collection, kind of building the right evidence, because at the end of the day, 9 times out of 10, when people give me evidence, there's always something that needs to be filled in with the gaps, right? Because we know as attorneys what the government is looking for. But the harder question is usually individuals who are in the middle of a building process. And what I will let everybody here know is that we actually have these special programs designed for individuals who are in that building process. So if you're in the STEM field, especially individuals here who are tech or tech entrepreneurs, we have something known as the Manifest Opportunity Matching Program, where essentially you can work alongside an attorney and also an evidence development coach who will partner you with the right opportunities to help build up that credibility. Does that guarantee that you're going to be approved in EB-1A? The answer is no, right? Because part of it, or the responsibility, as we talked about earlier, Varun, is on you. I can tell you what opportunities are out there, but I can't action them for you. You're going to be the one that needs to apply for these judging opportunities and do them, right? But if you follow our guidance and direction, definitely by the end of the process, you would have a stronger foundation to apply for the EB-1A. So a lot of the times when we have people who have the roadmap or who are on the way and are committed to being on the way, we do have a program for those individuals who approach us.
Excellent. I think we've kind of covered the landscape of EB1 and its different categories, who apply, who don't. We've just demystified some myths about you needing to be a researcher, you needing to be Einstein-like, or a lawyer says no to you and that's the end of the road. You've explained to us a lot of different criterias and how you can meet them. I know there are some excellent questions that have come up. I think it would be great to spend 10 to 12 minutes on the questions and then probably come back and do kind of like a conclusion uh, advice that you would have for everybody who is here. So the immediate questions that I see are from Ricky. They are a little specific, but I think one question that I liked was, what is the percentage profile readiness? Is that ever a thing that you could calculate? I know you said it's hard to give a benchmark, but what are the ways that you can train your gut to know whether you are ready for the EP1 or not?
So let's base it on criteria alone, right? Because I think that's the easiest way. So let's say you look at the 10 criteria. I will say that the best benchmarking to start would be people who are called 2.5ers. You have two well-established categories, but the third one is like, I'm not sure, but you have a roadmap or maybe an idea, or you feel like, I think that when I take the time and maybe with some advice, I can definitely push into that third category. So that would be when I would accept the case, is because I think I can give the seasoning or can advise on the seasoning for the benefit of your application. Another way to think about it is that the bare minimum that we would take on here at Manifest to help for an individual is someone who maybe is at longest a year away from filing, right? Now, that might seem like a really long time, but think about it. If I'm going to be publishing new publications, organic ones that are going to, not necessarily even technical, you're talking about like just regular media publications, right? Let's say it's like payments.com. They have publication guidelines. By the time you submit your article and they accept it, you're probably not going to be published for at least 2 or 3 months. And I can't file with the government saying that we anticipate that you're going to be published on this date. We have to file after it's already been published, right? So that's a good way to kind of gauge it for yourself. If you feel when you're looking at your application that you have 2 strong categories and you're like halfway or you're maybe for a third category, that's somewhere that we can definitely help out. If you feel another way to gauge it is that, you're like a year away because of all of the things that are happening for you or the things that you have kind of invested into new opportunities for, then that's also a good time to approach an attorney or engage an attorney.
Is there anywhere that I can go and understand what kind of cases get approval so that I can create probably a benchmark for myself? Although I will say, as a disclaimer, is that a lot of time has gone into creating that profile for this person. So any benchmark you see can be scary, but maybe some indications, maybe some ideas of how many judging opportunities, all these different nuances within each criteria. Is there anywhere to benchmark that?
Yeah, so I know some people will say like, "Oh, go on forums, go on Reddit and things like that." I'm not a big fan because you can't verify like what people actually did versus what they're saying, right? However, the government regularly publishes decisions, known as AAO decisions or Administrative Appeals Office decisions. Usually, when they publish these, it's because someone was denied, let's say an EB-1A, but they sought an appeal of that decision. You can actually see who won appeals, who lost appeals, and why they won or lost them. And that gives you a good indicator of the trends. Like this appeals officer said, hey, 7 of this type of peer review was enough. USCIS is wrong on this. Or they agree with the officer and say, hey, the officer had every right to deny this because of XYZ. That immediately gives you an insight on what are they taking, what are they not taking? And even us attorneys use that as a good benchmarking tool for ourselves when we advise clients. You can find them on the USCIS website, by the way.
Awesome. So USDI's website, AAO, right? AAO,
Yeah,
am I correct?
the AAO decisions. Yeah.
AAO decisions. Pretty cool. I see a question here, which is, I think, could relate to a lot of people. is I worked with my employer and already filed under EB2. How can I roadmap myself to EB1A? Is that something Manifest would consider taking into coach?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that nothing precludes you or prevents you from filing your own self-petitioned EB-1A, right? EB-1A is something that can be realized by yourself and without your employer sponsoring it. Sometimes people think that if I qualify for an EB2, I immediately qualify for an EB1A. That's not necessarily the case. There are some documentations that we can use based on whether it's a perm process or an NIW process that you've gone for that EB2. But this is definitely something that Manifest can help you out with, and I would recommend scheduling or submitting your information for a free consultation so that we can walk you through what that roadmap looks like and also assess where you are, because you might be pleasantly surprised that you have much more going on for you.
I think that is a good segue into also something that I was curious about, which is what are the different pathways to EB1A? Can somebody be an F1 student and qualify for an EB1A? How about people globally who are creating amazing businesses, maybe are global experts at a field? Can they apply from sitting outside, not having ever worked in the US? Can they apply for an EB1? Would love to know more about that.
So for students, I will tell you it depends on their level of credibility when they apply for the EB1A, right? Because you have to overcome that initial impression of how is it that you're recently a student or you're on a student visa and now you're arguing that you're at the top of your field. But I say that it depends because you can have a lot of people who decided to come to the United States for their master's programs, for their PhD programs, and already had a decorated career before they committed to that financial investment for whether it's better education or higher education. But there's also scenarios that I've seen where maybe you have achieved a lot, whether it's during your schooling years here in the United States or during your OPT and STEM OPT time. There is a level of acknowledgement that whether it's OPT, it's 1 year, or STEM OPT, which is an additional 2 years for a cumulative of 3, that a lot can happen during that time frame, right? You could have created the most celebrated podcast in your field. That is an achievement. Like I actually had a client once in the past who was on a scholar visa, essentially, which is like a student, is a different kind of student visa. But then they did manage to create one of the most listened podcasts in the United States. So the government can acknowledge that, yeah, they were a student, but they did something incredibly remarkable, right? When it comes to your second question of somebody who is outside of the United States, the ball is actually in your favor in different ways, because if you've already established a career, you have international experience, and you can show how beneficial that diverse experience can be to the United States, then there's definitely legitimacy to apply for an EB-1A. You can apply for an EB-1A from outside the United States.
Okay, very cool. So that's another alternative because I know that a lot of people have considered moving away from the US because of all the visa restrictions and the things like that. They have a legitimate path back to the US if they want to, if they are able to build something impressive in wherever they've chosen to live in the future. That is excellent and very optimistic to hear. I do see a question here coming up again and again about how new regulations, new executive orders, new benchmarks of how fast the government bodies are working on different things. How is, maybe I'll get more specific. What are the new standards with EB1A and EB2 NIW? Like, how have you seen that changing? And maybe you can also share something about processing times also.
Of course, yeah. So I will tell you that there isn't really publicly brand new guidance. There are definitely established directions from the government, and it comes in two formats. Number one is that we've seen internally through our processing of cases and filing of cases that there is a slightly higher standard, especially for EB2NIWs and EB1As, when it comes to the level of evidence. So to give you a clean example, in the past, if you were like a famous shoe designer for Nike, it was good enough to just say and have proof, hey, I'm a shoe wear designer for Nike. The reason why Nike is a distinguished organization is because it's a Fortune 500 company, right? There you go. Nowadays, the government is probably going to RFE that and say, well, explain to me the significance of a Fortune 500 company. Why is that distinguished? So a lot of the times in our recent applications, we've had to treat evidence like layers, right? Like an onion, essentially. For everything that we're proving on the outer layer, you need these inner layers to further establish or further reinforce why it qualifies for that category. We're also seeing an increase in pushback for final merits, which is to really genuinely prove that even if you meet the categories, that you are distinguishable, that you have sustained that national or international acclaim, and that requires you to invest into opportunities, appearances, or conferences that make you clearly affirmed as an expert outside of your role or your 9 to 5 at your company. Right. So these are things that we're definitely developing on. But the second thing that some of the people who are commenting here have remarked is, Nicole, they announced that in part of their regulatory agenda that they're investigating the rules and criteria related to the EB-2NIW and the EB-1. So that is very true. What I do want to make clear for everyone who's here, though, is that nothing's been published. So they didn't say exactly how they're looking to change it. We just know that in the agenda, they will be publishing this rule for notice and comment, which is this whole rulemaking process where they say, hey, these are the changes that we are proposing. General public, please let us know how you feel about this. And then afterwards, they have to comment and respond to, let's say, bucketing of the comments or the issues that people have against that notice or those changes. And then and only then can they implement those rules. We do not expect these rules to be published until maybe a couple of weeks from now, all the way until December, because all they said was like fall. fall winter 2025. So it's possible it could be as little as a week or two from now to as long as like December. Once those rules come out, that is a question to definitely have a conversation about. It will either accelerate people's wanting to quickly file the EB-1A or the EB-2NIW under the existing rules, right? Or it may give people some pause to wait until those new rules are in place. Because the question of modernizing can benefit certain industries and also de-benefit or at least make it harder for other industries. I would like to think that if the government is very pro-tech, which it seems to be very much so at the moment, maybe not with the H-1B rules, but having this whole alignment with Jensen Huang, NVIDIA, and all this kind of stuff that's going on right now, there could be areas of improvement that could be helpful for many of you who are in much more practical fields.
Interesting. Maybe a final kind of rapid fire question based on some of the things that Ricky has asked, Ricky YM. He's asked about, or he or they have asked about different criterias. What's the best way somebody can learn about what different criterias mean? Is there any good resource you have to share?
Yeah, actually, I go direct to the source. I go to the USCIS website a lot. There's something known as the policy manual, and there's a specific chapter that actually outlines the guidances or outlines the definitions of each of the criteria that the EB-1A has. That is a good place to start because that's your source of truth. Everything else, right, whether it's on ChatGPT, is just interpretation or based on certain kinds of assumptions. Of course, another great resource is that we do a lot of webinars. We have a lot of recordings on our YouTube channel and along with our blog posts and our social media that give out a lot of this content and direct feedback when it comes to specific criteria. So if you're interested in learning more, definitely USCIS, go to the source of truth, see how it is that an officer adjudicates it, and also don't hesitate to visit our website and our socials to see all the other content we have produced, advising people and leading people towards the right direction when it comes to their EB-1As, or at least explaining where you can start.
Excellent. I think this would be a good time to kind of come back, kind of wrap up a few things. And I probably have a two-parter here, which is this discussion, a lot of the information online can feel like drinking from a fire hose. What would you suggest people do? Maybe the next three steps that they should do if they maybe are at the top of their field or feel like they are a top performer at work. What are the next three things they should do? And then finally, any overall advice you would have for everybody listening and interested in the EB-1 pathway?
So the first step that I would advise anyone to do is start a document, a spreadsheet, or a drive that you basically dump every single argument that you can make or document you can make for each of the criteria. right? And that's how you start benchmarking, because you don't benchmark by just sitting there and being like, all right, here's the 10 criteria. What do I think to myself? You should start kind of putting together the puzzle pieces, because that's going to give you ideas as you're putting together those documents. And separately, you start to feel like, wait, this might be possible. Look at all the things that I've done, right? So you have to actually do that. Put together a spreadsheet, list out all of the criteria, start inserting things that you've done that you feel may be workable in those criterias. The second thing that I highly recommend to every single individual as well is to actually read the USCIS guidances. I know, like, it's not really incumbent on you to become an expert in immigration, but you'd be surprised at how much you can learn by how the government defines things, right? One of the biggest sentences I think I've become known for is that word choice does matter. It truly does, right? Those definitions ring clear very much in the guidances. Are there areas of interpretation? Are there definitely gray areas? Of course, right? But again, another great benchmarking tool. If you've done something that is exactly one of the examples that they have listed, then congratulations, that is something that is going to be useful for that criteria. They do give a lot of examples and they do give a lot of roadmaps. Number three is actually a very weird insight, but I do recommend it to people. USCIS uses RFE templates, and these RFE templates actually go through a commenting period and they get sent out to the Immigration Lawyers Association for review and the like. There is an EB-1 template for RFEs. So why is this powerful? Because you can see where they can attack your application and why and what documentation that they're looking for. They actually list out examples for the officers to copy and paste in those RFEs, right? To say like, hey, if you feel that you're missing this or you couldn't find this, ask them for that. So reading that RFE template, which is, again, just Google EB1A RFE template USCIS, you'll find it. It can give you a lot of really strong insights on developing or at least assessing your work. But overall, I do think that there's a power to working with a good thought partner, right? I'm not going to say explicitly like, an immigration attorney. A lot of people are going to be like, that's biased, right? But let me at least express like working with a thought partner, whether it's a colleague in the industry, a friend who's going through the same journey, or whether it is actually an immigration attorney. The reason why there's a benefit to working with a thought partner is that you need a feedback loop. Don't kind of sit down by yourself on an island, right? And feel like you have to assess everything by yourself. The best person to tell you if you truly feel or look incredible is somebody outside looking in. Hey man, do you think that I've done achievements? Would you feel like if you were interviewing me for a role in our industry that you would think that I'm a cut above everybody else, right? And be honest. As a lawyer, I will also tell people that picking the right firm or picking the right attorney is so important. And there's like really great questions you can ask. I don't think approval rates is actually the best question to ask. I think what is actually the better question to ask is, have you recently gotten approved people in my industry? Or you can even test how knowledgeable they are about representing individuals in your industry. I rarely advise people to work with attorneys who don't know anything at all. Or at least at minimum, they need to show a passion to want to understand what it is that you do. The field of engineering is so expansive now. Like quantum computing is something that I'm trying to like understand a little bit better every single day. It's the next era that is going to be post AI, let's call it, or aligned with AI, right? If you are in that field and you approach an attorney who cannot even grasp a level of understanding or is not willing to talk to you to learn more about it, then that should give you pause. That should give you pause, because how can they best advocate for you if they don't know what it is that you are doing to even the most basic or intermediate levels of understanding?
Wow, that was excellent. I think those are great takeaways for a lot of people here. If I don't know if you have another couple of minutes, I would have loved to ask people who are listening what their best takeaway was. But I have a solution as well. Is that if you, um, first of all, let me just ask you, do you have 2 minutes where we can just ask people what their best takeaway was?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. So then let's just go get in there. Everybody who's in the audience, everybody who's followed and listened to this conversation, what was your number one takeaway from this chat? Please add it to the chat. We would love to hear what your best takeaway was.
While we're waiting for people to answer, I'm going to try to answer one more question just because I saw
Sure.
something that I think would be helpful, right? When I see questions regarding can articles in well-known technical e-magazines be used if IEEE publication citations are moderate? The answer is yes, you can use them as part of an argument. So long as you went through a good vetting process to get that published, and we can make the argument that other industry experts are reading that particular publication, that it was meant for those industry experts. There's definitely an argument for non-academic scholarly articles.
Very cool. I see AP has shared that anything is possible. Sakleen mentioned having awareness about something is very powerful. I'll see if a couple more come in, but I've also acknowledged that joining the chat has been a little problematic with StreamYard today. I wasn't able to get in myself as well. So that could be some of that as well. Yogesh talked about the last three steps for preparing EB-1. Great starting point. I think those were awesome takeaways for people. I think this session overall has been amazing for me, even though I have been steeped into this world a little bit just from writing about it, because a lot of my audiences are immigrants like me. I learned a ton from this chat as well. I would echo what Yogesh said. The last three steps that you shared about what somebody should do to kind of prepare for this EB-1 path were excellent. Thank you so much for this chat, Nicole. Everybody who's here, you have the option to get in touch with a manifest lawyer or a manifest somebody from the manifest team and discuss with them your profile, your EB-1 questions. And that is a great step in the three steps that Nicole has shared as well. I know Nicole is humble enough to not share that, but that is one of an amazing step that you can take. The link is there in the chat. I would love to see if anybody takes advantage of it. Nicole, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for joining today's conversation. Okay. Right, ending the stream now.